Creating a safe and inclusive environment in schools is essential for all students to thrive. And in today's episode, I had the privilege of speaking with Flint Huffman, a veteran transgender teacher, a figurehead in transgender advocacy, and an inspiring voice in educational policy. Flint shared his personal journey of being in the public eye while transitioning, and we spoke about the complexities of creating inclusive educational environments regarding the current challenges that trans teachers and students face. And what we came to was this: so much of it comes down to self-love. How you can love yourself enough to have the courage to authentically express who you really are, and therefore create space for others to do the same. This conversation was one of my favorites, and I really hope you enjoy it as much as I did. And Empowered Educator workshops are filling up for this January, so grab your seat at empowerededucator.com/workshops and discover how your impact changes when you focus on your own social and emotional well-being. The well-being of a school is dependent on the well-being of its educators, so it's time to shift the attention to you. Empowered Educator is changing the landscape of professional development, and its impact is making generational change. The Empowered Educator Winter Series starts January 17th, and registration is now open. Claim your spot at empowerededucator.com/workshops. You are a gift to this world, so act accordingly. Are you caught in the whirlwind of overwhelming responsibilities? And does the very thought of Monday morning send chills down your spine? Well, it's time to toss those feelings out the window. Welcome to Season 3 of the Take Notes podcast, where you get to make yourself the priority in order to show up as your best self. I'm your host, Jen Rafferty, former music teacher, emotional intelligence practitioner, mom of 2, and founder of Empowered Educator, and I've been where you are. In this season, we're not just talking about surviving, we are diving deep into thriving. Are you ready to take the lead in your life? Well, let's do this. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another fantastic episode of Take Notes. Today, I have an incredible guest. With me is Flint Huffman. Flint, him, is a veteran transgender teacher and content creator with over a decade of experience in the classroom. In addition to working in policy and action in his community, he has more than 300,000 followers across TikTok and Instagram, where he makes videos about trans life and history, education, and general teenage weirdness. And I so appreciate you being on the show today, because that is where I found you, which was on Instagram on one of your incredible videos talking about all of those things. So thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited.
Yeah, it's going to be a great conversation and a really important conversation and a timely conversation. So trans rights have been in the spotlight. And as a trans teacher, the microscope was on as you're actively changing your pronouns and figuring things out for yourself. What is that like? Tell me about that experience, not just personally, but being an educator.
Yeah, transitioning is, for those of you who don't have a trans person in their lives, transitioning is a really uncomfortable experience because you start to understand, you have an inner knowing, right? You have an inner knowing, you realize that something's not right, and you figure it out that it's probably something gender related. And so you start transitioning. But it's like physically and mentally uncomfortable. You're a lobster who has outgrown a shell that you've been forced into for so long. And you're doing it very publicly, right? All that transitioning socially, right? Changing your pronouns, cutting your hair, in my case, wearing things that are a lot more comfortable for me. But then also medically, right? I got top surgery over the summer. I started taking testosterone. And all of that is uncomfortable enough to experience just in your own personal life. I was doing it with an audience of 200 teenagers. And on a larger scale, I have a pretty substantial online audience that I started curating when I started transitioning because it was so isolating. It was really hard to do it by myself and do it so publicly. And I wanted to try to find other teachers that were going through it as well.
So through that, how has that community shifted, and for you and for the other teachers who are also transitioning that you've connected with?
I think there's a lot of fear now. There's always been fear being trans. I'm not talking as if it's ever been better. I think it's been a little bit quieter. I started advocating for trans students about 10 years ago. For those of us in the queer community, we know that a lot of us are really aggressive allies before we start to understand ourselves, right? We're like, I don't know. I just think gay people should have rights. I'm not gay. I just think that they should. And then you're like, okay, actually, maybe I might be a little bit gay. That's what happened to me. I was very vocal as an advocate for trans students for a long time. For the most part, I was telling people about trans experiences for the first time. When I would tell them about trans kids, they wouldn't really know what that meant. I'd have to explain it. And when you're hearing about it for the first time, you just say, oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that was a thing. What can I do? So at the time, it was like bathroom access. And then all of a sudden, you start having these conversations and people have an idea of what you're talking about and have decided that they know what that means before you finish your sentence. And so you would go into talking about trans students, or in my case, even about myself, and they would have feelings about what that meant. I've had some very uncomfortable conversations with colleagues, with neighbors, with family members that I don't know I would have had 5 years ago if this was an entirely novel concept for them. So people, even though they don't have any personal experience with trans people, decide that they know what it means to be trans before we have a chance to tell our own story. And that's what other trans teachers I know have experienced as well. A lot of misinformation and a lot of outright hate that has made it really challenging for us to exist.
I know that you had just posted something about this, and I was reading something that Brene Brown had written a day or two prior to posting this thing. It's really hard to hate people close up. So why is that so difficult when you are face to face with somebody and there is an absence of this human connection? What is the message there? What is the situation there? That it is happening so often and with such vile aggression that I want to know more about that. What is that?
Yeah, first, I'd like to say that my heart sings when I hear you quote Brene Brown. I get very excited. So thank you for giving me another reason to trust you and your wealth of experience. And I think that it is hard to hate people close up, but it's easier when you have robbed them of their humanity before you meet them, right? You've decided that you're not talking to a person. You're talking to a predator. You're talking to a threat. You're talking to somebody that isn't real. That's when it gets easier, right? That's one of the reasons I think a lot of hateful people are mad about me working with kids, about trans people working with kids, is they don't want kids to have the chance to humanize us before they have a chance to undo that, right? I've been teaching for 11 years. I've had something like 2,000 students. That's 2,000 people who knew me as a person before they knew anything else about me. That's going to be a win, right? I'm stepping away from the classroom in the next month. I'm done, right? I'm tapping out, but it really does feel like a big win to have had the opportunity to humanize my community. And it's a sad sentence to have to say, right? I don't think that's a thing that marginalized people should have to do. We talk a lot about representation in classrooms or representation in literature, right? But we forget sometimes what it means to ask somebody to be that person, to be the representation. You're asking them to take a lot of personal risk and to potentially hurt themselves for the benefit of others. That's hard. That's a hard ask.
It's an impossible ask for anybody, let alone a child who is figuring that out for themselves wherever they are. Adolescence sucks no matter what's happening. And then to create this marginalized space for someone who's going through a more challenging transition, it seems just torturous. So one of the responsibilities that we have as educators is to create safe spaces for every child who walks through our doors. And yet there seems to be controversy about what safe space means. There needs to be action and dialogue and evidence of what safe spaces actually look like. So if we were to paint a picture, what does a safe space look like?
I'm really glad that you're talking about that, because that is something that we've spent a long time saying that we want to curate. We want to have safe spaces. We have signs in my school that say safe zone, right? And that question of what does that then mean? What do you do to make sure that space is safe? You can't just call it that. You can't say, my class is a safe space. What evidence does a kid have that if they come to you with something challenging or they come to you in need, that's going to be a safe place to express that? Can they come in dressed weird? Can they come in having an accent that day? Can they come in deciding to change their pronouns? And what is it going to look like with their classmates and with you? That's the big question, right? That's what a safe space is a place where you feel okay expressing yourself, where you can have an identity that's not going to be ridiculed, but is actually embraced. And I think that it's hard to have a safe space for students if we feel like we don't have a safe space for teachers. That's been the biggest conflict, I think, with my school and with my district is a lot of talk about safe spaces, but then we continue to see issues of hate and intimidation and discrimination that for the most part goes unchecked. And that happens in a lot of schools. I don't know if I have the answer for how we fix that. A lot of it is structural, but I do know that it's really challenging, right, to have a space where students can feel safe if the adults that are supposed to be curating those spaces don't feel safe themselves.
Well, and that's the whole thing. And to be frank, that's why Empowered Educator exists, because what we're doing is we're leapfrogging over the needs of the adults in these spaces and focusing on kids. But then we're missing the point, because if we ourselves are in pain, if we ourselves are going through our own journey and navigating our own life and figuring things out ourselves and struggling, how can we possibly create a space where a child feels safe enough to navigate it for themselves? We just can't. And so, I'll also be honest with you, I wear rose-colored glasses on my face unapologetically all of the time. And I really do believe that if we focus on teacher well-being and creating safety for teachers, that will drip down to the kids and help fix a lot of these very serious problems.
I think that's absolutely right. If I'm a parent and I've given my child over to a school, I want teachers who feel safe and empowered and rested, that have the resources they need, because you can't show up emotionally, intellectually for a child if you yourself don't have the capacity for that. And so I think you're right. I think that we talk a lot about what we're going to do with money in schools or cutting down class sizes. We have lots of things that we want to do to improve education. What we don't often talk about is how to improve circumstances for the teachers that are supposed to be delivering that education.
Yeah. And unfortunately, you're leaving.
Yeah. I tried not to. I promise I tried.
Well, and I say unfortunately for your community and for the kids who won't have you in that role. However, as somebody also who left the classroom, recognizing that that is a healthy choice and a powerful one, that you can now have space to advocate and do work in different ways that can have even greater impact. So can you talk about why you made that transition to leave?
Yeah, it's been a very long and challenging decision. I started thinking about what it might look like to leave the classroom, I think probably a year and a half ago. I think every teacher who was teaching during the pandemic thought about what it looked like to leave. And we were all like, no, we'll just wait. We're going to wait it out. It'll be different when we come back. And I was ready. I was ready to recommit to being in the classroom. I was so excited to have my students back, to be in the place that I loved, doing the thing that I loved doing. And it started, right, with being put on Fox News. I was on Fox News 4 or 5 times over the course of 6 months, in which an author chose to use my full dead name, which isn't, for those of you who are not familiar, dead name is the name that a trans person was assigned at birth that is chosen to leave behind. So my dead name was used. It's not my legal name. They also put the school I was at, the district I was at, made it very easy for people to find me. And I started getting just a deluge of threats, right? There was a credible bomb threat made to my classroom. They tried to target my home. People called and threatened to burn the school down. It was horrifying, the things that people were saying. They were upset about, this is the very beginning of Moms for Liberty and book banning. They were mad about LGBT books in my classroom. Not ones that were like part of my curriculum, but just in a bookshelf. And that was the beginning, right, of deciding what was going to be worth it. Was my safety worth my representation, worth my career? I tried to stay, and it kept coming back up again. It was obvious that it wasn't going to go away, that me being trans, me being openly and proudly queer, was going to be something that some members of my community would never be okay with and would continue to fight against until I couldn't do it anymore. Yeah. And so it feels a little bit like a defeat, but I'm really proud of myself for deciding to step away from myself and for my kids, because it's not fair to be in an environment in which your teacher is afraid.
Well, I know we don't know each other well, but I know that the impact that you are going to be able to make outside of the classroom is going to be far-reaching, more so than you could have done in the 4 walls of your classroom. And that's one thing. And I think it's important also to talk about how then the trans students who are in your district are experiencing being witnesses to your experience. Can we talk about that for a little bit?
Absolutely. It's something that I think about all the time. We all have trans students, right? Whether you choose to see that you have trans kids in your classroom or not. There are some students that won't choose to be comfortable coming out until after they finish with K-12, but we all have trans kids. And I know mine more, right? I'm the advisor for our Queer Student Alliance. And so I'm super familiar with my trans students. And I know how hard it is to transition even as an adult, like how much capacity that takes, especially in the environment that we're in now, where it seems like every day there's a new bill trying to restrict your healthcare or tell you what you can or can't read, where you can live, right? The fact that I'm going through to try to find a new job. And as part of that, I had to look at a map for relocation to see what states I couldn't move to because they would have restricted access to healthcare there, or I would be living under discriminatory laws in housing or employment. So like living in that environment as a kid, just starting to figure yourself out. You said earlier, right? Being a kid is hard enough. Going through puberty is hard enough. I feel for them very deeply. I do. And I can't imagine what it's got to be like to see someone who should be your example for what a happy, fulfilling trans life, the fact that they can't do the thing that they love because of the hate in your community, it's got to feel really hopeless. I think the chances of any of the students that I have hearing this are pretty small, but I do know that things get better over time. And right now we're doing what my dad has called the dead cat bounce, where all of these points of view are failing, right? Hateful ideology is less popular now than it ever has been. It doesn't feel that way, but it is true. We are, I think, experiencing the last final shaking oblivion of this hateful attitude, and we're gonna survive it. We're gonna get through it. We're gonna see the other side. I am a happy and healthy, thriving trans adult who just needs a change of environment, who needs a new place to feel good and to feel safe. And being trans is a gift. I love who I am. I love my trans community. I am happier now than I ever have been in my life, no matter what. And just in case any of the trans kids who are feeling hopeless are listening, you are great and wonderful and loved, and you are going to have an exceptional life.
I think that there's something really important that you said here, and you are a proud trans person who loves who you are. I think there is such an absence of self-love that causes so much of this outward hate. And I have my own queer journey. And through that journey, I've had to really get to know myself really well. And the self-love that has come from that journey has been incredible and liberating in so many different places where I choose to be in my life. And I want that journey for everybody, a returning to self and the self-love that then can permeate outward. But there's been such a disconnect from all of that, which really causes people to pit themselves against each other.
You know, I think you're right. And this idea of self-denial, which is what you're talking about, where you choose actively not to look inward and not to understand or to love yourself. Queer people, I think, have a unique opportunity to get rid of that self-denial. As soon as we start to understand ourselves, you really do have to spend a lot of time with you going through a queer journey. Not saying that straight people can't have a journey, but for us, it's inevitable. You have to spend more time inward. And so I think that you're right, that a lot of people who experience hate don't spend a lot of time with themselves. They don't think super hard about who they are or why, or the metacognitive function is just not metacognitiving. It's just not happening.
I'm going to be using that word from now on. I use metacognition a lot, but now metacogniting. That is now
metacognitiving. Yeah, there It is. I think absolutely. And that self-denial, you know, honestly is really common in education. I'm not going to lie. There are a lot of teachers that focus so much on everybody else around them that they don't spend time with themselves. They don't consider themselves first. They don't think about what they need. And I have a colleague who's right at the beginning of her career right now. And you couldn't have told me anything when I was 25 either, right? Like I didn't hear shit when people were telling me how to prioritize my life or you don't want to take grading home. I was like, I know who my life is. But I'm watching her do the same thing that I did when I was at the beginning of my career, where she's staying way too late. And she's going to every single school function. And she's taking work home over break. She came back and she's like, I graded 40 essays. And I'm like, I went to Vegas and there was a really cool rave. Like, you need to be doing that, right? You need to be doing things for you and spending time with yourself. And so I have that hope for any teacher that's trying to figure out how to be a more connected person and to be better for their kids, right? Is to stop practicing that self-denial.
Well, that's the whole thing, because while, yes, this self-knowing and self-love is for you, it is very much for the next generation that you are affecting, and your impact is only as great as your ability to go within, period.
Absolutely. And if I'm thinking about how often I'm in front of teenagers, I have 150 kids or something this year. They are looking at all the adults in their life for a model for how to live their own life later. And if all they see are adults who overwork themselves and don't ever put themselves first, we are dooming them to continue that cycle. It's one of the reasons why representation is important, right? I can be a happy trans person in front of them and they're like, damn, I can be who I am too. That doesn't mean being trans, it just means being authentic to who they are. And they get that representation and they know that they can be that person as they get older.
That representation of authenticity, I think, is the bottom line. That's it.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about advocacy and allyship, because that's another big piece of this, with all of the noise. And I think, I heard what you said is that hateful rhetoric might be at an all-time low, but it is loud.
Yeah.
And how do we create places and conversations for people to intentionally and productively advocate and to be helpful allies in a really meaningful way, not just like post something and like someone's Instagram reel? Like, how does allyship matter?
I want to really quickly say, posting something and liking someone's reel, as much as that feels sometimes like performative allyship, from the perspective of someone who is in a threatened community right now, it actually does a lot. When I'm at an absolute low, right? When there's been some horrible threat or someone online says something really hateful about my identity or about my relationship to my job or to kids, having a wall of voices say, that's not true, you are loved and accepted, that does everything. So sometimes, even though it feels like the minimum and it feels performative, it does something. And in this case, it's really helpful to repost or to what you should do generally is to amplify the voices that already exist. So if you follow trans content creators, doesn't have to be me. It could be me, but
it should definitely be you. Everyone needs to follow you because you're great.
At Just Flint is fine. If you're following trans creators, right, and this is true for any marginalized group, follow more Black creators, follow Jewish creators, follow as many people as you can who represent voices other than your own and amplify them when they're talking about their experiences. Even though that feels minimal, that's hugely important. Showing up for the people in your life who need you to be there. I think recently I talked about this experience where I had a couple of male colleagues in their like late 60s. And so they're still learning a whole lot about what it means to be trans. But we were having dinner together and I mentioned this was a couple of months ago when I wasn't quite passing, which means that I couldn't quite tell like what gender people thought I was when they looked at me. That sort of middle weird puberty stage of taking testosterone. And I was really nervous about going to the men's room because I couldn't do the women's anymore. I was nervous about going to the men's room. And I mentioned that one thing I miss about girlhood is how we all used to go to the bathroom together. And it was really nice. And so when I said that and I got up, they like came with me. And it was really sweet. And it was this moment of non-performative allyship where they heard a need, which was, I feel a little unsafe right now. And they just did it, right? They just got up and went with me. That's what we're looking for, right? We're looking for those small moments where you can show up, take on that argument over Christmas with your family members that are super hateful so that some trans person doesn't have to later. Challenge it, repost stuff from people who experience things different than you, and go to the bathroom with a trans friend if they look freaked out.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you said that. I agree. I think that the social media space used in that way can be powerful. And I do appreciate that perspective. I think something else that you had shared right there is, even as you were talking about that story with your colleagues, replacing that judgment with curiosity. Like, if you don't know, ask. How do you go about sharing that with people? How do you go about, I guess, sharing the message of curiosity? If you're feeling that there's something that you're perceiving as an obstacle or is coming across as judgment, how can we replace that with curiosity? Is that curiosity welcomed?
Yes, I think curiosity is welcome. There's a difference, right? When you're leading with curiosity and you're leading from love and curiosity versus assuming that someone is at like a wax museum version of curiosity, right? Where you're looking at them as an object rather than like a person. And so curiosity is always welcome. We are not encyclopedias, right? So we don't always have time. Every once in a while, I'll get some DM from someone that, hey, I'm having an argument with my aunt. Can you write out a really great response to her about how terrible her opinion is? And I was like, no, that's on you. Like, you can do the research, you can figure it out. But if you see something out in the world, or if you're having an experience with a trans person and you are genuinely curious about their experience, you can always ask, hey, totally okay if you're not comfortable answering this, but I was curious about XYZ. And generally, you got to think, if you would ask a not trans person about it and not feel weird, then you can probably ask a trans person. There are some things that are a little bit more invasive, right? Most trans people don't love being asked about surgery or about genitalia. That's the kind of thing I wouldn't ask my mom. So maybe don't ask us. But yeah, I think in general, curiosity is great. It's the only way we get to know each other better.
Yeah. I think going back to what we were saying before about safe spaces, cultivating a space where honest human connection through curiosity is cultivated is really important for that connection to each other.
Absolutely. No, I'm speaking at a university tomorrow. I'm giving them a presentation. I'm actually talking to the sororities and fraternities at this university about how to create safe spaces as they are recruiting, specifically for trans people. So I love that. That's a great way to inspire, create curiosity. But at the very end, I have a Q&A section that, hey, if you've ever been too nervous to ask a question, this is the time. So when someone is offering the opportunity, is welcoming questions, tells you ahead of time they want those questions, then I say take that opportunity when it comes, grab it.
Yeah, it's so important because when we know more, we do better. And that's, that's how this all works. So I have one last question before we kind of close out this interview here. When it comes to advocacy on the policy level, what can we do? What are just a couple of really easy things that we can walk towards and be really intentional with our actions?
My thought on where you should be focusing your policy attention, like all politics are local, right? So the more that you can do things at the local level, because trans stuff is happening at the local level right now. You have a school board that is trying to decide if they should do a forced outing policy for their trans students. That's everywhere. My school district was dealing with it. 2 other districts in my county were dealing with it. Or they're trying to decide what their library book selection should look like, or whether or not teachers can share their pronouns in school. It is absolutely a hot button topic, and it's happening at your district, regardless of whether or not it's on the agenda at your next school board meeting. They are talking about it. So choosing to go to a school board meeting and register a public comment to stand up in front of your community and voice support for queer teachers and students, that's where I would start if you're trying to decide how to make direct action. Because you might feel like a drop in the bucket when you're writing to a Congress member about some giant bill in a district of 100,000 people. But if you're in a community, you've got 1,000 voters that are all doing school board work, then going and talking at a school board can do a lot. So I would start there and then work your way up. Write letters to people who are your representatives. Tell them that you care about the trans community and about education, right? Write them letters. Some poor intern is going through those letters, but they're counting them. They're counting them and they're telling your representative how the people feel about it. And they're going to think about that before the next election.
Yeah, that's great advice. And it's really easy to become complacent when it comes to things like local politics, particularly school boards, unless something's on fire. Mm-hmm. And then everyone goes because that's when the whole performance is. But the real work happens in between those times when they're having those conversations and not a lot of people are there.
Oh, yeah. That's your place. That's where you got to go cook, right? You go in and there's 14 people and they're sitting in those terrible folding chairs and it's 11 p.m. That's when you get up and you make your big statement and use those full 2 minutes, baby. Wait until that buzzer cuts you off.
That's right. Yes. So I ask now the question that I am asking everybody on this podcast, which is, what is your dream for the future of education?
I have so many feelings about this. I used to have a little speech that I told my students. Do you remember when, was it Betsy DeVos was the head of the Department of Education? So I used to
remember.
tell my I told all my students about her and I was like, if I got her in a chair in front of me and I got 15 minutes alone, the first thing I would do is I would try to steer her away from universal standardized testing, and then we will work on everything else. So I think that I feel differently about that now. I think that the longer that I've been in human rights advocacy and education, my vision for public education is that it stays public. That's my first thought. We are seeing like this slow creeping of private and charter education that is slowly privatizing a system that needs to be accessible for all of our students. The second we submit to stratifying our educational system so that students who come from higher socioeconomic worlds get a better and better education, we are going to be slowly disintegrating the fabric that weaves our country together. And so I think the more that we can empower public education, that's my vision. That's what I want. And I also strong union representation for teachers. When we work together, we work collectively, we are stronger. We're stronger and we can support each other. There is no one who is a better support for a teacher than another teacher. And I think having union representation, whether that national, state, local, we all deserve it. We all need it. We all need to be involved in it.
I love that. And I really do believe that the more we share our dreams out loud, the closer they become a reality. So thank you for sharing.
Manifesting.
That's it. So before you go ahead and carry on with the rest of your evening, I would love for you to share with our listeners how they can get in touch with you if they want to learn more about you and the awesome work that you do.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for one more chance at a plug. So you can find me at Just Flint Is Fine. I'm on Instagram. I'm on TikTok. Those are the places you can reach out to me. And so I'm really excited for what happens next. I won't be in teaching, but I'm going to continue to be in education for as long as I can.
I'm excited to see what happens next for you too. And all of those links are going to be in the show notes to make it really easy for people to just click and follow you right away. And I really encourage that you do. Flint stuff is really informative and inspiring and funny and ridiculous and exciting. And I'm excited for you in this next chapter.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And thank you for coming on. I really appreciate your time and your talents. So if you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure you subscribe, give it a 5-star review, and share it with a friend. And we'll see you next time on Take Notes. Incredible, right? Together, we can revolutionize the face of education. It's all possible, and it's all here for you right now. Let's keep the conversation going at Empowered Educator Faculty Room on Facebook. So trans rights have been in the spotlight, and as a trans teacher,